discussion is intended to focus on a couple of key ideas around the concepts of delight, empathy, gumption, and inclusivity, and homogeneity, and try to understand how all that can come together. And as much as we were worried that these would feel like rambling discussions, we've always found kind of a common theme between the 4 or 5, and hopefully we'll find one here too. So I want to start the discussion by kind of interlacing 2 of the essays, one by Alex, one by Courtney, primarily because I think they both shared a common theme or a call for some sense of courage in an interesting and I think unique way. So Courtney, I'll start with you. In discussing the future of our community, you formatted your essay around 3 core factors, right? Practice what you preach, hold leaders accountable, and leapfrog the competition. How do you think those are related to this concept of gumption and courage?
Well, as I was rereading these, I loved that when I looked through each of yours, I saw the same concepts rising, right? Like I actually used the word homogeneity in mine, like Alex's, and Ellen and I were talking yesterday about how we need to hold leaders accountable, and I also obviously touch on inclusivity as well, and so it was really amazing that while 4 people who didn't know what the other ones were writing all wrote very similar concepts, and I think it's because we know what needs to happen. It's a question of if we have the gumption to make it happen. And I actually looked up right before we started this because I was like, I need to really go back and look at the definition of gumption, and it's initiative, aggressiveness, resourcefulness, courage, spunk. That's my favorite one. But I think that we all kind of know that. I mean, that's the first line of my essay, is that we know that that's something we need to do. It's just not really in our blood as Midwesterners to be willing to speak up. And then also to not just speak up, but to support others who are speaking up.
You share some personal experiences in your essay, and I think gave some wonderful examples of not only some real world experience, but also I think some metrics that people either misunderstand or don't appreciate. When we talk about things like municipal equality index or the percentage of educational attainment, like in some ways, and I think this is part of the argument, is we assign those metrics because we think it validates a goal, but we don't tend to measure success 3-4 years down the road or whether or not we move that needle at all. Why? Well, first off, do you think that's unique to us? And why is it such a common allowable behavior?
I think that it is a common human characteristic that we all have what I casually refer to as ooh shiny disease, which is we are always looking for the next shiny thing. And the problem is that it's very hard to sustain momentum over a long period of time and to keep people excited about one goal, because initially, people are excited, they want to fund it, they want to be involved, and then inevitably people go on with their lives. And so to try to maintain that over time is really hard. And we really, I think as humans, treasure that that kind of instant gratitude. People want that. And that's why we always talk about celebrating mini wins and mini goals and that type of thing as well. But long-term change is really, really hard. And I don't think that it's exclusive to economic development. I work a lot in the higher ed industry now, and it's the same thing, right? What's the new shiny thing we can work on when the same challenges have been here for years before and probably will be for years to come? And so it's just about how do you keep people's attention for a long period of time? And that's a challenge, unfortunately.
You and Alex both talked about the habit of, quote, championing mediocrity, which was an interesting phrase. In that, I think you both explicitly questioned the value of copying other cities instead of working to move past them in more of a competitive framework. Is the issue that we shouldn't be looking at external influences, or are those reference points need to be defined with a higher bar? You know, is it one or the other?
Alex, do you want to take that?
I'll let you start.
Okay.
I appreciated your breakdown of how we should be looking at some of these examples and the fact that we need to leapfrog them as opposed to just mimicking. And I know that's what I wrote about, but I'll let you go ahead and then I'll follow up.
Okay. Well, I think that looking outside influence is important. I think if you become too insulated, you deny yourself the inspiration of other cities, other countries, other ways of life, and it's that kind of diversity that I think that we're missing. So I think that that's important. But I think what happens is we look at it in too safe of a way. So we're looking at it and saying, okay, well, they did it, we'll just do the same thing, rather than saying, that's really cool. How could we make that work for Fort Wayne? And I mentioned riverfront development in particular in my work in marketing and thinking about what we call UVPs, unique value propositions. So how do we not just have a really great riverfront park, which we do, and I'm not knocking that, it's incredible. But then how do we start thinking about, as we think about phase 2, phase 3, what are we going to do that makes it unique? How are we going to say, if you open a new restaurant, I just went to a new restaurant this weekend and I said, what is it I have to have? And they said, here's the thing that we have. We have the only machine that does this in the state of Indiana, and you're going to want to try it. That's what I want to see Fort Wayne do is, it's the most architecturally interesting. It's the most, green and self-sufficient. It's the, how do we take it to the next step? As I think I say, stop playing Midwest checkers and start playing three-dimensional chess. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Alex, so I bet has some ideas on how to do that.
Well, I echo all of that, totally agree. I think Irene had a really interesting point about the input from community is something that we completely fail at. When we bring that cool, shiny new thing into this town and everyone's ready to pay for it and it's what's going to happen, I get community and involvement with community can be hard. But that idea of having that meeting in the basement at Citizen Square in the middle of the day when people are at work, and that's like your moment to collect input, that is failing us. And we are failing at that level over and over and over again. And I also think that that whole idea of how does it fit in Fort Wayne doesn't work without that baseline of like, what does the community want out of this? And I get that it's complicated and it doesn't make it any easier. We don't open up art jury sessions to the public because it would probably end in a riot. but we don't also we don't make a point of just choosing without input. We are pretty good about that. It's something that we've learned that you need to do with the programming that I do in Fort Wayne. And I understand that a phase 3 of a park is a little bit bigger and it is difficult to get everyone into a room and have a conversation, but we just aren't doing it correctly yet. And that's one of the pieces that's missing from, in my opinion, from when we do these large scale projects and we mimic instead what they did in Kentucky because it's worked in Kentucky. And then we're surprised when it's not embraced or there's not we've missed a big piece of our own soul in it.
Can I, Zach, can I ask Ellen and Irina a question?
Please.
So based on this conversation, so when I was reading these essays and I was thinking back to this very topic, and I was thinking about when the Northeast Indiana Regional Partnership started Vision 2020, and initially there was the Regional Opportunities Council that kind of oversaw the initiatives, and then there was also what we called the CAP, and I'm forgetting what it, Ellen, do you remember what it stood for? Like Community Action something panel or something?
That's right.
I could be making that up, but it was the CAP, whatever that stood for. And what was interesting is, and it's kind of like democracy, right? Like in what we're dealing with as a nation, right? So it was really hard to keep people involved on the long term and continue to provide input. And then it was also hard for them to trump what the Regional Opportunities Council wanted, because they were investing over $10,000 a year into this organization. And so there was this kind of juxtaposition of who gets to decide. And as I look back on that and how we tried to make that work and it didn't, I just wonder, Ellen, with your position, Irina, with your, your article and what you had to say, what are both of your perspectives on how should we be doing that better? If Alex and I are saying this is a critique, what do you guys see as what should be done next? Go ahead.
Oh, well, I know just a little bit about that process. I have not been directly involved other than maybe sitting in a few of those meetings that you mentioned. But other than that, I would say, I come from a different country, and I've spent now almost half of my life in the US and half of my life in Italy. And I've traveled outside of those two countries. But what I have seen as far as being able to include people's input is a lot of deficiencies for the cities. One of them, and I specifically, my experience has to do with really advocating for immigrants and refugees. And it's not very dissimilar, I have to imagine, but I don't have a lot of expertise outside of that area. So by any means, I'm not an expert on inclusivity in general, but immigrants and refugees, I do know. And what I would say is that when those initiatives start, and I can think of a million other or several other situations where input is needed, and all of a sudden I get a call where, we'd like to know what immigrants and refugees think about this new project or this new plan. Oh, we need to include those voices. Can you make that happen? And so it's the riverfront, or I sit on a committee because I represent all immigrants and refugees apparently, or I get to, do the work to invite one group to another's group meeting. Those relationships should be in place already. So this is my issue. The relationships now, we should not wait for a specific time frame to try and gather input. We should have input, all year round, and specifically immigrants and refugees. They are relationships that the city does not cultivate, and I witnessed that myself. And what I question is not just a matter of the doing, but is the intention. I question the intention on the side of city government to actually, be interested in wanting to have those relationships and that input, and not just mark it as a box that was filled for a specific project, whether it's the Allen County, next plan or what have you. Individually, there is a lot of very good, well-intentioned people. I met some incredible people through those projects. At the same time, there is not a understanding that we should be prepared with those relationships ahead of time. I spoke recently with the city representative to suggest a special populations planner. Other cities have it, so even that, should make them feel better. But apparently, that when it comes to immigrants and refugees specifically, even looking at other cities is not enough for Fort Wayne. We're way beyond. We're not even interested in what they're doing. We just want something new and shiny for ourselves, and then they will just, they should like it, right? And so I celebrate a lot of progress, but I also see that things come and go when you don't have strategy. When you don't make what you say, and I like what you say, Corny, when you say, do what you preach. So if you think it's actually, if you want to welcome in Fort Wayne, if you're a welcoming city, right, make that part of your strategy. And it is not all about budget and money. As a city worker for a couple of years, I have seen, unfortunately, that again, the loudest voice and who knows who still does work. And so that means that those who cannot speak English, for instance, or don't happen to have the same history of relationships because they haven't been here long enough to support. So they just are not present in those circles. And I like for that to change. I'm excited to read all of your essays and see that I maybe have been more allies than I thought I had. So that's what I have to say about that.
Ellen.
I'll jump in. All right. Gosh, so many notes here. I think like anything, there's a pendulum swing sometimes like far one way and then a pendulum swings far the other. I think we're in the middle of a pendulum swing that is a little bit more towards community input. I do see some positive developments, but I know that there are areas that we're just really far behind. I mean, when you do look at other communities, to Courtney's point, to understand the diversity and what else is out there to really challenge ourselves and get out of that kind of insular fishbowl, we're really underserved in terms of community development corporations. So to Irene's point, in terms of those relationships being there over a long term, organizations like CDCs that serve specific neighborhoods or specific populations, our community is really underserved in that area. So it is like when input is needed into plans, those relationships aren't necessarily there and cultivated. We also had at one time several neighborhood liaisons in community development. And then I think there were 4, and then there were 3, and then 2, and now I'm not even sure if we have 1 anymore. I do know that there's some work to kind of bring that back, but those sorts of things are always, I think those are the things that when budgets are tight, they tend to be some of the first thing go, but arguably, I think some of the most important. And, one of the things that I think the city did differently and really stepped out on was the Southeast area strategy. To Alex's point with, having input in the middle of the day, you have to meet people where they're at. And I know that that process did a lot of pop-up shops. They did a penny for your thoughts and did a pop-up coffee, pop-up shops, and in different shopping centers, and really did things differently. I wrote an op-ed several years ago about kind of digital transformation in government and meeting people where they're at in terms of input into processes. One of the things that I love, City of Charlotte does this really nicely. Their major community plans are online. And so you can see the vision for the community front and center, right? You go to the city's website or the kind of the government websites, and they're inspiring, right? That is their kind of front door to the community. And then within that, they have like, here's our projects that are going on. Here's a person you can call if you have questions about it. Here's the budget. And it really kind of integrates the municipal kind of public budgets with the vision and where we're going and how people can get involved. And so I do see signs of some of those pieces coming together, but it's hard. And it's really hard, especially when we are growing in ways that we haven't. And we talk all the time at GFW, we're the fastest growing metro in the Great Lakes region now, right? That is creating some friction points across our community development landscape, right? And in good and bad ways. And growth is really uncomfortable. It's really hard to challenge the status quo in terms of organizations and programming. And Courtney, you wrote about this, and Alex, you wrote about this as well. And I think that's what we're experiencing as a community now with this growth, with the investment that's occurring. But we've got to step up to the challenge and make sure that there is an inclusive approach to how we're growing and how we're investing.
This idea of gumption, we'll use Courtney's word, seems to have a bipolar quality to it in 2 ways. One, I'm sometimes confused on what I think in terms of who should have the gumption. Is it a person of influence or the community at large? And who's leading who? And when that misalignment happens, I also, at least some way, want to try to empathize with the realities of the structures that put those people in positions of influence, for good or bad. I could see a scenario where a leader could sincerely think, here I am leveraging tax dollars. I need to develop a strategy that has been successfully tried in another community to protect this investment. And I can see a large percentage of the community thinking that's a really responsible way to assure success. And I don't necessarily think this group would necessarily agree with that. But that reality of legitimizing risk, I think can't not be part of this discussion. So how do we wrap that into the gumption equation? That my ability to have that gumption, if you think it's the role of a leader, in some ways is relying on also assuring those that are listening that this isn't too much risk. It's just enough, just the right amount.
I think one of the things that ties all of our essays together in different ways, but the word I would use is culture. So are we worried about buildings? Or are we worried about people, was what I was talking about, right? You know, and Irina also, and Alex, you were talking about culture as well through the art lens, and Ellen, you were talking about culture through the lens of delight. And I just feel like it's kind of a community is kind of like a large scale version of some kind of business or other group, right? Where what happens is a result of the culture that is developed. So if you have a business that has a culture of not taking risks, then that community is not, or that business is not going to be able to innovate. They're not going to be able to have creativity. And so I feel like that's kind of the subtext of what we're all talking about. And so I think, Zach, to your point, that it is beholden on both the community itself and the leadership to have that gumption. You know, in my article, I mentioned that, you know, I spoke up in a meeting and a very prominent community leader agreed with me, but didn't have the gumption to speak up. And so one of the things we have to do is start supporting other voices, and that not just speaking up ourselves, but how do we back other people so that they're not just out on a limb themselves. And so I think that that's a cultural change that is going to be new, especially as we grow as a community.
Does it require or reliant on a larger discussion on how we measure success? Because we had this discussion in another panel that I think their common thread was fear. So this is kind of the antithesis of that, right? Here we're all saying courage is the common theme.
But the lack of courage is because of the fear. I mean,
so here we are, right? And how these two things intersect. And if we're doing it under the precept that we're hoping or holding our leadership accountable to have or possess this gumption, I'm curious to see how the system in which supports and legitimizes these leaders can redefine its value of courage, gumption, failure, right? And normalize it in a way that it's exciting and not a reason that someone shouldn't get reelected or someone should get dismissed from their position of influence.
I was almost thinking about this also in the terms of lack of confidence. It is lack of courage, and but also it's lack of confidence. Fort Wayne, and I remember a few years ago when I first moved, the first couple of years I moved to Fort Wayne, it wasn't necessarily a choice. It just kind of really happened to me, but now it's a choice. But I remember some of the narrative that I would hear about Fort Wayne, and it sounded almost like this: Fort Wayne is just not that bad. Like, hey, Fort Wayne is just not that bad. And then of course the whole cheap thing, but that just came back even today on LinkedIn for me. But the Fort Wayne is not that bad. We've had a narrative, maybe well-deserved, for not being excellent. You know, I mean, we're just not, we don't excel. I say it's easier to list the things, or it was easier, at least for a long time, to list the things that we just didn't excel at, especially coming from Italy, Europe, and or having visited larger cities, it's just easy, or it was easy to say, well, we're not really good at the reasons why we wanted to leave Fort Wayne, or even the reason why our friends for a while were not very excited for us to live here. Things are turning. Things are turning. The narrative has changed and is intentionally being changed from a marketing standpoint by the regional partnership and the actors that have invested in the branding of the city. So it's almost a lack of believing yourself, and it is a fear that, you know, along the way that what that could look like once we come on the other side of, you know, growth, what will be lost along the way, including our predominant white culture, conservative culture, versus what would be the influence of other more liberal and multitude of cultures all around us, which are really the reality around us, which just haven't necessarily accepted them fully. So I think it's also lack of confidence, and it's believe in yourself. We can believe today more than ever that Fort Wayne can compete if that's what you care about, but at least that Fort Wayne is actually a place of choice. It's not just a place where people end up, you know, being, or it's not just a family-friendly, cheap place to live. It's actually a destination, and it's something that even coming out of my mouth, it's like I was not a believer, but I am more and more now.
Ellen, I'm in your essay, and I think this will be a segue, I promise. You wrote that great neighborhoods and public spaces must strike the right balance along two continuums. First, they must provide vibrancy and opportunities for social connection. Second, they must provide a level of efficiency and utility, but also support investments that might otherwise be dismissed as frivolous or unneeded. And that intersection of public space, frivolousness, and intimacy is great joy and delight. To me, one of the things that pops up immediately when we talk about a redefinition of courage is the promotion and justification of the frivolous.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely. Oh wait, finish your thought.
Like things like public art, that for so long, I think we didn't have the courage to say frivolous isn't a bad thing. It's what excelling communities have the luxury of doing. And to be able to protect these frivolousness, especially in the public realm, I think is a really interesting way to frame maybe a new appreciation for what courage might look like in that capacity. I had a colleague once that gave a wonderful lecture on the design community's allergic reaction to imperfection. We strive really hard, especially knowing architects, to provide these perfect places for people that no one wants to live in, because no one wants to surround themselves in perfection. Every good place we've ever said, oh, that's a great street, that's a great place, that's a great community, they're rampant with imperfections. And
right.
These wonderful frivolous things that organically popped up along the way, but we've had a hard time putting that, in a jar and showing someone and saying, here's the lessons learned I brought back from the other community. They didn't care that this wasn't perfect.
When you were talking about how do we measure success, I mean, talk about like the gut check, like, does this feel right for our community? Will this make people happier? Will this make me happier, you happier, my neighbors happier? How do you measure that? On some level, you can't. And so it's just trusting what people have to say, trust and believing them, right? Believing that our residents know what they want and that they're being honest when you ask them. And I think Alex's essay was a perfect encapsulation of the frivolous, but being absolutely essential to the success of our community. You think about alleyways in terms of an efficient way to hide garbage and haul garbage and get in and out of parking in older neighborhoods, right? But Alex has helped turn that into so much more for our community. How do you measure that? I have no idea how you measure it, but that has gotten us so much press, so much awe, from people that come downtown. So many Instagram posts of people. No, it's, you know, I'm a researcher by trade. Like a lot of my job is quantifying things, but I also recognize that there is just so many things that you can't quantify. And in fact, when you try to quantify everything, that leads you to homogenization. It leads you to sterility. It leads you to perfection, which nobody feels a part of, right? And so it gets back to that tragedy of the commons. When it's everyone's responsibility, it becomes a little messy, right? It's nobody's responsibility, but that's a beautiful thing about, and I like to think of the commons as like community and economic development overall. We try to impose this order on it to try to neaten it up into lanes, right? But that's where you get into a situation where it just doesn't feel like us. It doesn't feel like our community.
Alex, I don't mean to oversimplify any of this, but you might be the poster child for at least communicating to a larger public what the importance of what might otherwise be perceived as frivolous means to quality of life and quality of place. How has that journey been in trying to maybe justify or legitimize that in real time? Because you're the one that has probably lived through it more than anyone.
So Fort Wayne doesn't like change, and it doesn't like things that aren't safe. And that's been my experience. I would say that when we measure success, something that we are lacking is that idea of, is this inclusive? Is this forward thinking? Does it present to the rest of the country and the rest of the world that we are a forward thinking, creative place with culture and awareness? So when I look at a lot of the projects, if we're missing public input and we are working on finding ways to fix that, we are also not using the metric of, is this making us better? Is this making us more inclusive? Is this making us a better place for everyone and not just for a handful of who is in leadership or otherwise? But I would say that the frivolous was maybe the easy way to sneak it in because they didn't see it coming. Really, honestly,
Yeah.
I understood that as a creative, I wanted to see murals in public spaces. I wanted to see a presence of creativity within the downtown footprint. And that was initially the only thought. And then the idea that you're able to understand, because when I travel, I know that where there are lots of murals and lots of public art accessible, there's a culture there. It's typically happening organically. There's an energy there and it pulls you in and it makes it a community of choice.
Mm.
What we are doing now with the frivolous, the art, is essentially throwing a loop in it. That idea that maybe Fort Wayne is ready for this if we have enough people in leadership that are willing to take the risk and start using the question of, is this for everyone in every project they do? Or is it just a mixed use space that's going to bring an investor a great deal of profit?
I think when we talk about the tragedy of the commons, I've been convinced over the years that the only thing that can ruin the commons is usually highly trained experts. They tend to be the ones that ruin those phenomena in a community. And what you're really looking for, if we're trying to outline unmeasurable things, is the highest percentage of ornery people, the people that think they can manipulate the commons on their own terms. They have some choice, some agency in their own community, their own neighborhood, and they feel empowered to have that authority. And I think what people don't understand, especially when they go on these infamous site visits or city visits, is they're not recognizing what places provide that agency. Or maybe more, they're not judging or classifying cities as failures when highly trained experts take that agency away. And to me, that's what I hear when I hear things like delight coming from an urban planner, which is an oxymoron in most cities except ours. Is that is really a sense of personal control over my own individual well-being, one that I take some great pride in, not only the place which I call home, but in some way the sense of belonging I have in being here. And if I can't cultivate that, I don't have the patience to wait years for that emotion. And that's why I think onboarding, in-migration numbers, like all these things are important to understand that delight is maybe one of the most important urban planning factors. It's a lot trickier to figure out how to cultivate that, systemically. But if we're talking about things like gumption and delight and inclusivity, I think in some way we have to look at the commons that way, as opposed to constantly talking about it as this problem we're going to plan our way out of,
Right.
in a weird way, and take that what it's worth coming from an architect.
I know Alex has to leave soon, so I want to say this while she is on the call. I think that when people like ourselves are, knee deep, neck deep in thinking about some of these things, it's really hard sometimes to see progress or to give ourselves, credit for having moved the needle at all. I know I'm horrible at this, so I just offer you this weird lens of hope for what it is worth. When we started Vision 2020 in 2012, so like a decade ago, there was a fight about whether quality of life should even be one of the pillars. This should not even be a thing. We should not be concerned about this. So to Zach's point that, Ellen is saying delight is important. To your point about the importance of art in building community, for whatever it's worth, I just offer you that nugget of hope. Some change has occurred.
That's nice.
The other thing I wanted to bring up to this group that I thought was interesting is, Ellen, you mentioned in your essay the example of the Sidewalk Toronto's project. And what I thought was interesting about that to this discussion is, their goal was to be the most measurable community in the world.
Right.
That's an idea that I think has some gumption and some intentionality to it. And it seems like it was a failure. But what can we glean from that in terms of this discussion of the frivolous or courage in front, maybe some of those less successful ideas?
Yeah, so the project in Toronto had some really lofty goals, right? And the one that really stood out to me was that, about half the units that were going to be developed would be affordable. So that's an amazing benchmark, right? And something that in a community like Toronto, especially proximate to the riverfront, is probably very, very needed. The issue was that the process was not a inclusive one, not a public one. It was more of a real estate project, but that then, the terms of which crossed into the private lives of people who would live there or use the space, work there. And I think what was interesting to me about that was that there was a line. There was a line for people in terms of, we do want this for our community, but not this way. And there, I think what it did is it really asserted the negotiation that that neighborhoods do have, the power that they do have, and the voice that they do have and can exercise. It's not always easy. It is oftentimes difficult. But I think the Toronto example just underscored that, to your point, Zach, that resistance against a very sterile, very controlled kind of commons experience. People are drawn to places that they feel like they can influence and be a part of and see themselves in and take ownership of. And I think that was the Sidewalk Labs example in Toronto was just a example of controlling the commons to the extreme.
Well, I'm curious, Irene, if you mentioned yours, the importance of improving the format, the frequency, and the type of interaction with the public. So in your mind or your experience, maybe, what role does the commons, this shared public realm, have in inviting those discussions to be had? Maybe not, I think too often we measure them by whether or not you can have a discussion in the public, but that still assumes someone's inviting it to happen. In what way can the public realm itself be the invitation?
Well, just because it's hard, I think it doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And you mentioned before perfection, imperfection. I mean, there's very little of what we do that is, perfect to start with. But what I would like to see is that it's intentional. So those relationships, that interaction. I think a good example of that is the city, in a good way right now. So the city has created a neighborhood activation group with a couple of staff members that are dedicated to really going on the streets of the neighborhoods and presenting themselves, and really presence, just show up, is half of the battle. And I would say, I'd imagine that's similar for just about any person, right? Show up and be genuine, or just call it for what it is. So don't give the wrong label, such as public input, to something that it really has not. It doesn't even resemble public input or public interaction. And I've seen it over and over and over, that just to receive federal funding, say the city would just have to, it was almost like a burden to the planners that we would have to get input. But then anytime I would, suggest something different, like, hey, how about in the evening, or how about at a library? And how about we translate the flyer in multiple languages, and I send it over to, the nonprofit coalitions, or whichever group you think that would be most interested and have more to say. I actually got in trouble. I mean, I have to say that I actually found that I at that time did not belong in that place of employment, which now I'm happy to try and influence from the outside in other ways. So I'm actually working with the city to develop a strategy for to create a learning community. So a learning community is where you have a two-way conversation, and you have those conversations intentionally. You schedule them, not only because you want to learn about each other. Bye, Alex, I'm sorry. But also because it is so very important. I mean, selfishly, I don't want to mention violence, but we want to be on top of things before, or in the case that we may have an emergency situation that will require us to have, open dialogue in a hurry. So that's what I think about, and I almost sense a tension right now. I sense a tension between those of us who are embracing new and different, and I don't know how big we are and how big others are, but those who may not be ready to really embrace different. And so I don't know, we'll see.
Another thing that I thought was interesting about the essays is there's a handful of common resources that were used across the essays. A handful of books that multiple references to resources. One of them, Courtney, was the Jim Clifton book. And that has been a book that has been circulating in this community for a while now. And I feel like under the umbrella of intentionality, doesn't really get, it's misunderstood in terms of the urgency that I think it communicates there. If it was titled The Coming Jobs War, whenever, 2012, it's the current job war now. I mean, there's nothing coming about it anymore. In this idea of gumption specifically, maybe, or courage, what is, I think, the takeaway from the sentiment that book's trying to convey?
Well, the reason I used it was because I did see it as a common touch point, that book, because we had used it as a community. We had brought him here in person to talk to us about this. And so I thought, okay, this is a common touch point for all of us, or, you know, people who heard about it at the time. And I think you're right that the urgency is missed. The main point is that not all communities will win. So even if you think you're doing everything right, you're measuring all the things, you're getting investors, if you're just focusing on that, are we making the biggest buildings, you're not going to win. And so he really emphasized a lot on, you know, whatever is happening in the country is happening in the country, but what you can control is what's happening in your community. And it is up to those community leaders, those what he refers to as tribal leaders, to really make that change and make that investment. And I think that there was an interest in it, but he makes some, what sadly some people I think see as controversial points about, it's not about your orthodoxy, it's not about your, you know, specific view. It is about the community and what will make it competitive, both within your state and your country, internationally. And some of that small thinking is going to hold us back. And I think not everyone, I think we kind of stepped over some of those parts of the book that we shouldn't have.
I also, there was another essay that talked about the importance of specificity, that made the claim that interesting things have to be both surprising and specific.
I love that.
And not everything is, but more importantly, probably to this conversation, is even when they are, sometimes people only want to listen to half of that equation. Like,
Right.
oh, that's surprising. Don't bother with the specifics. It was interesting. And so to me, that is a good example of something that, you know, from the sidelines, it looks like everyone rallied behind, but maybe just rallied to say that's interesting, that's surprising, but not really too concerned with the specifics in any real way, kind of like a high school book report. And to me, that was part of it, is if we're serious about this idea of gumption or courage, I think all communities, this isn't specific to us, have to get better at figuring out how to have more systemic discussions about specifics, real discussions.
And I think it has to be both about our future and our past. If we can't acknowledge specifically what we have done wrong, and I see nothing wrong with Toronto having failed with that project. I think it's great that they failed because they tried something new and it didn't work out. And that's what we're scared to do. And I think that's what our community is craving. But we have to be specific. And this is one of the reasons I hesitated to add my personal stories into there, but I think it's important because it's not just understanding what needs to happen, right? We need to be more inclusive. We need to practice what we preach, you know, whatever. But how? I think a lot of people don't understand how. And I think in order to understand the how, you have to be able to look back, much like if you were in a relationship or with a child, to say, when we did this, it wasn't correct. We need to do this, or we did this wrong. We know we need to change it. Let's ask new people what we should be doing differently. And I think it's that specificity that we're missing, both in talking about our history and our future.
It made me think, Ellen, of your reference to the well-being index, in that it's, in some ways, when you look at the scores, I think to a lot of people would be surprising and specific. And an interesting way, I think, to frame the importance of that specificity in a way that probably most people don't think of if you're having a discussion about community development. You know, asking people if they have love in their life is technically usually not a normal whole question when we're talking about urban renewal. But here we are, right? And that's becoming more and more of a normal kind of intersect.
Yeah. I mean, we often say economic development can really be anything these days, right? Because when you talk about the success of a community and its ability to attract and retain people, you know, their experiences matter. And experience is everything, right? It's if they're welcomed by their neighbors, if they're invited to go places, if they're find their way into the network, right, so to speak, if there's things for them to do that they're interested in. I mean, that experience is everything. And so, yeah, the Gallup Wellbeing Index, and Zach, that's one that we talk about all the time. You know, it's having supportive relationships and love in your life. It's liking what you do each day and being motivated to achieve your goals. I mean, these things tie into social networks. They tie into, you know, the opportunity to, you know, really chase after or achieve what's important to you. And the community networks and inclusivity impact all of that. And I think those are Gallup's done a nice way of kind of tying that together with a survey. Those are really important issues, but on like a hyper local level, they're really hard to get at in terms of, are we doing this right?
Right. Yeah, and trying to figure out how to find a correlation between that and an actual project or a thing,
right,
physical thing.
I have a question, and you know, part of what I'm thinking about is authenticity. Just to give you a brief example, that my husband and I often talk about what's the best Italian restaurant in Fort Wayne, and early on we've had this conversation about, you know, the most Italian thing that Fort Wayne could do is, and this was more like 15, 20 years ago, having a corn restaurant, meaning a restaurant that served local, fresh vegetables that Fort Wayne residents could identify with. That's Italian. Italians eat what they grow, what they identify with. That's part of their culture. So a lasagna that is not is not in our tradition is not as Italian as a good plate of corn, and explain all the different the diversity within Italian regions. And I think I've seen that happening more and more. And I think what I would like to see is that even with our new and the idea of the gumption, Courtney, I wonder if that connects to that too. You know, how can we be authentic, not just new? And that means just being different. We need to be Fort Wayne. We need to be something that others are not necessarily, because that's what we know. We need to identify ourselves and not just, have a beautiful park. Why is that in Fort Wayne? So I don't know how, but that would be a good way for me in my head to brand this whole idea of we need to be to try something new. We need to take risks, but also has to be authentic. I don't know.
Well, to go full circle to this, it's an interesting Midwestern dilemma. It takes a lot of gumption to sincerely be delighted in being yourself. It's a hard thing to do for a lot of Midwesterners. And the idea of that our progress is constantly combated with an instinct to be apologetic about our successes, and not be proud of who we are, and say, who in their right mind would want to come to a restaurant that serves corn? I don't hear Italians saying that in Italy. They're not apologetic that you're getting lasagna. So this idea that I think that is where that gumption rests, is having some frame of reference to understand who we are and who we want to be. And that's a much broader and more diverse group than most care to mention or acknowledge. But then having the gumption to understand it's not something that we should apologize for. It's something that I think in all reality, something we should be very, very proud of. And that pride, I think, would be contagious in trying to attract more people with more gumption.
Well said. So,
I know we could do this for another hour. I have no doubt in my mind, but I also know you have day jobs and have more important things to do than answer my questions. So what I did want to do is give you a sincere thank you for taking the time, not only for this discussion, but to write such thoughtful essays. I know, especially over the last 2 years, schedules have been chaotic, and the last thing most of us probably thought we had time for was a project like this. But we thought it was really important I want to say for the community, but maybe just for the 20 that participated, to pause and reflect on some ideas that we thought were underappreciated and misunderstood, and try to articulate that as best we could. And I thought you all did a beautiful job of taking each one of those kind of granular ideas and giving them the time and sensitivity they deserve. So I thank you for that. I hope this isn't the last time we have a discussion like this, but from us, and if I can, from the community at large, thank you sincerely for being involved and sharing your thoughts and ideas.
Thank you for
inviting
shepherding
us.
this.
Thank you, Zach.
So to be continued, we'll do it again sometime.